Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us. Back with us on This Week in America, Adam Grossman. Adam is founder and president of Block 6 Analytics, a company that helps sports organizations manage enterprise marketing and corporate partnership. He's worked with a number of sports organizations, including the Minnesota Timberwolves, Soldiers Field, Washington Capitals, to enhance their corporate sponsorship and enterprise marketing capabilities. He's co-author of the book, The Sports Strategist, Developing Leaders for a High-Performance Industry, which pulls the curtain back on the business side of sports. High schools, amateur, professional, how it impacts fans, winning teams, ticket prices, fan experience, school fees, and much more. Adam is also adjunct lecturer at Northwestern University and George Mason, and he's with us on This Week in America. Adam, welcome back to the program. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you. Thanks for the great introduction.
It is my pleasure, and there's so many interesting things to talk about, and we'll have you back to talk about high school sports. I'm just reading in Alabama, the average high school coach now is making like $120,000 a year, so it's getting down to the high school level. We'll talk about that later. I want to talk about the NFL draft and an article you wrote that really caught my attention and really gets you thinking as a fan. Wrote the article for Forbes, and the premise is very simple. Which player should an NFL team draft? And fans will say you draft the one that's going to help the field, help the field on the team, and the one that's going to help the team win. And you're saying not so fast. And we've talked about this before. This really is a business, and winning is just one of a number of what criteria that goes into running that franchise. Talk about the thesis for the article and how you should look at drafting a player from a business standpoint.
Absolutely. So the idea behind the article and the thesis of the article is exactly what you just said, is that sports franchises and sports leagues, teams, events are businesses, and businesses usually win in performance when they get the best players or get the best people. And the best people are usually the people that can help them economically and also in terms of engaging with their core demographic. And that a lot of performance for players has to do with their on-field performance, but a lot of it also has to do with their ability to help the team accomplish its revenue goals. So when we're talking about NFL teams in particular, you're looking at 4 or 5 main revenue streams, and that comes from game day revenue, which is ticket sales primarily, but also parking, concessions, merchandise on site. You're also looking at media rights deals, and with the NFL, that's primarily its television rights deals and also its mobile rights deals. You're talking about sponsorship, and that's anything from a sponsorship within stadium where you see a sign for a brand to online and digital sponsorships where you go to websites and you can see videos or digital billboards. And then there's also off-site merchandise sales as well. So when you're looking to draft a player, you're not just looking to draft a player based on what they can do on the field. There's business, our model looks at what can a player do in terms of how can it drive value and how can it drive revenue to a team, both based on its performance off the field, but again, in its ability or in his or her ability to help a team generate revenue in those 4 categories.
So as I'm sitting there as an owner of a team in the National Football League, which is really a license to go directly to billionaire lodging at that particular point in time, as I'm sitting there, winning's important, obviously, but you're saying, and we've talked about this before, and it's featured in the book, the Sports Strategist, that winning, again, is only one part of the equation, right? You need to drive the revenue, and you can have a mediocre record for a number of years and still be very successful as a franchise financially.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's both. What we like to say is kind of a derivative of the Vince Lombardi quote, is winning isn't everything or the only thing when it comes to having a successful business in sports. And in that case, one of the examples that we have used in the past is the Chicago Cubs for a long period of time, especially from the period between 1945, when's the last time they made it to the World Series, until about 2003, and then even until 2008 before the Ricketts took over the team. They're a team that were successful off the field in terms of generating people coming to the stadium or generating high television ratings or generating high merchandise sales. So outside of football, the Cubs are a good example. On the opposite side, on the flip side, one of the examples we use in the book is the Glasgow Rangers, who was a team that had probably the most success in the history of soccer in terms of it won 54 Scottish Premier League titles, and then the year after it won its 54th title, it went bankrupt because it wasn't looking as closely or looking as closely on how the team made revenue and what its cost structure was. So the idea when you're talking about an NFL owner, it's the NFL teams are businesses, and you want to look at a player's entire ability to help you generate revenue. And that's how all businesses would look at somebody they're looking to hire or somebody they're looking to get into their organization. In particular, players become expensive, particularly as in the NFL, as they sign their next contract after their rookie year contract. One of the players we talk about is Matt Ryan, and Matt Ryan in 2014 had a $25 million cash payout, and he was the third pick in the 2008 NFL draft. The idea is you're going to be making a long-term investment. Even from an NFL team, you could be making a long-term investment in these players. You want to make sure you're getting the most value you can from the investment, and you want to make sure you make the right decisions in the short term to get the benefit in the long term.
And we're going to talk about how you measure that. Our guest on This Week in America is Adam Grossman. His website is Block6, and you spell out 6, block6analytics.com. You go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link on directly to Adam's website. The metric that you developed, how you can actually measure what, from an economic standpoint, a financial standpoint, what the player is bringing to the franchise, is RAR, revenue above replacement. Explain briefly how you came up with that metric, and then we'll talk about some players because it's interesting. You would consider Matt Ryan to be successful. And when you do it from an RAR standpoint, he's actually losing money for the franchise.
Absolutely. So in terms of revenue above replacement, one of the things we look at is the goal here is to say how much more value is a player adding compared to a replacement level player. So for people who are somewhat familiar or very familiar with Moneyball, one of the things that Moneyball, one of the big metrics in Moneyball is wins above replacement. And what they're trying to figure out is how much value does a player add from his on-field performance compared to a replacement level player. And you could think from a baseball perspective, a replacement level player would be a AAA player or somebody who's on the fringe of a Major League Baseball roster. So they're still actually, those players are still actually very talented, but compared to a superstar, there's obviously a wide gap, or compared to a good player, there's a wide gap between a replacement level player and a star or a good performing player. What we wanted to do is apply that kind of methodology to the business side of sports. In particular, there are players that add significant value to teams, both on the field and off the field, and we wanted to see what their values were in terms of how much value do they add overall, but also how much value do they add compared to a replacement level player. So for the article that you mentioned, we looked primarily at quarterbacks, and then we looked at some of the top performing players in the NFL to see how much value they're adding to an organization. And one of the players we did look at is Matt Ryan. So Matt Ryan actually is adding a lot of value. He's averaging what we found to be about $17 million in value, which again is a lot of value to a team. But at the same time, if you're paying him a cash payout of over $24 million, that's still a lot of money in net value that you're losing, even for a quarterback who, again, has a strong on-field performance, but isn't as successful driving fan engagement and driving revenue into the streams that we looked at. And again, going back to our model, looks at those core revenue streams. We look at how a sports organization makes money, and we apply an individual's performance to how an organization makes money by looking at how winning impacts revenue, and then also how does an individual player help a team generate revenue outside of winning. And that's what our model looks at.
And the revenue streams that Adam's talking about and discuss: ticket sales, television ratings, jersey sales, and sponsorship and other revenue. And you point out in the article, an NFL team could still expect 88% of its seating capacity to be filled, 88%, 17.5 local TV rating, even if the team performed at a minimum level.
That's correct. So what we did, and I'll try not to get too technical here, but what we did is we wanted to figure out, what portion of a team's performance in terms of capacity and in terms of television ratings were based on their ability to win versus what portion of the team's performance was based on other factors. And from our perspective, those other factors are primarily, again, how does a team generate revenue? How does a team engage fans, engage sponsors, and engage media using through their teams and through the players? And what we found is that running these regressions, there definitely was a correlation between winning and economic performance. So we want to make that clear. So winning does have both value to the fans in terms of, obviously, people want their teams to win, but also it does have a strong economic value on the teams themselves. So we're not saying that winning isn't an important factor. Again, it's just not the only factor. And what we found is that, based off the performance in the 2013 season, that running a regression on capacity and winning percentage, or running to say how much does winning actually impact a stadium's capacity, we found that there was a positive effect, but that at a baseline level, that an NFL team should expect a stadium to be 88% full, and vice versa. And with the television ratings, the same idea that a minimally performing team is automatically going to attract attention regardless of how it performs on the field. And we, from our analysis, we found that to be a 17.5 local television rating.
Adam Grossman, our guest on This Week in America, co-author of the book, The Sports Strategist. We're talking about an article that Adam had written for Forbes magazine about the NFL draft. What players should your team draft? That's the concept we're talking about. Block 6 Analytics, and 6 is spelled out, is his website, block6analytics.com. Go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link on directly. Okay, you went back and you looked at quarterbacks in particular, not all, but in particular, and we'll start with quarterbacks out of the 2013 to 2014 draft. And you've often heard that, boy, when you get these players and they really rise to the occasion in their rookie contract, which now is what's set by the collective bargaining agreement, that you really get a bargain. And you talk about several, and let's go into that. Andrew Luck, as well as Russell Wilson. These guys are real bargains for their teams, aren't they?
Absolutely. So we were talking mostly, the 2012 draft class was a really strong draft class for quarterbacks. There's some starters that are still playing today, and Russell Wilson, Andrew Luck, Robert Griffin III being the most prominent among them. And you can argue that Robert Griffin III, after his 2013 or after the 2012 season, hasn't performed to where to the level clearly that Andrew Luck or Russell Wilson, but is going into this year going to be a starter for the Washington Redskins. And the real winner in that draft, though, was the Seattle Seahawks, because they got Russell Wilson in the 3rd round. And Russell Wilson's average salary is about $667,000 a year. And what we found is that he actually delivered around $67 million in value based on his on-field and off-field
Now, say that again, because that's, first of all, it's staggering what he makes, because most fans would go, when you think of the Seahawks, you think of Russell Wilson. Here's a guy making less than, not that it's anything to sneeze at, but less than $750,000, and he's the star quarterback for the franchise.
Absolutely. So, and that's when you're talking about a draft, particularly outside the 1st round, there's a lot of value to be had. So we're talking about, again, comparing Russell Wilson maybe to a Matt Ryan, where Matt Ryan is definitely a good quarterback, and he's definitely performed well for the Falcons, especially on the field. The difference between what you have to pay Matt Ryan going into his 2nd contract, like I mentioned earlier, versus Russell Wilson on his 1st contract is a lot. In this case, it's about $24 million, or a little under $24 million. So the idea of, if you can find a franchise quarterback, even in the 1st round, but particularly in any round after the 1st round, you can get a lot of value. Now, the thing about Russell Wilson is, if you're drafted outside of the 1st round, you can only get a 4-year contract. And so he's only going to be under contract for the Seahawks for 1 more season. So going into the 2016 season, he's going to be making it probably closer to what Matt Ryan makes. But for these 4 years, particularly as the Seattle Seahawks have gone to the Super Bowl twice, one of the key reasons they were able to do that is because Russell Wilson's contract is so much lower compared to other quarterbacks who have performed as well as he has, or has been a star of the franchise. And not only is he a star of the franchise on the field, but he's one of the biggest stars in the NFL generally. So he's driving a lot of value to those revenue streams based off his off-field activities and his ability to engage with fans and media and sponsors. So Russell Wilson is a really good example of the value you can get for the draft, and he's a type of player, particularly after the 1st round, where your team should be looking to see who are the players where we can get a lot of value and where can we maximize that value. Did you get a thank you note from his agent after the article in Forbes? Because he's going to be going in very shortly to negotiate a new contract, and it looks like he's got a lot of room to ask for a lot more money there. Yeah, there's a limit to, even Peyton Manning, who we found drove the most value to his organization. There's still a limit on the amount of value and amount of money that they're going to be paid, but that's actually one of the big problems that Seattle's having right now, is that it doesn't want to necessarily negotiate a contract extension with Russell Wilson before it has to, and it wants to try to keep the value of his contract low, because recently they paid a lot of their free agents a lot more money because they've been outside of their rookie contract. So again, this is something when you're talking about looking at the NFL, and maybe you're, even if you're a casual fan, you want your team to retain its best players or to get new players that can help add a lot of value. The NFL draft is a key area where you can find players for relatively little money and find players. Not everybody's going to be a Russell Wilson, obviously, but it's much easier to add value from a draft pick, and making sure you can maximize your draft selections is a critical way for NFL teams to maintain their value and get the best value from their players.
An interesting story with Johnny Manziel last year. The Browns draft him, and I'm sure they're thinking it'll add some spark in the field. We feel that he can play at this level, but it's going to really drive the fans. And he shot to the top of the charts in terms of jersey sales, and everybody is pumped that Manziel is coming to town. Talk about the economic impact in the beginning and where it is now in Cleveland with Manziel.
Yeah, so Johnny Manziel is actually a good example because he's actually a quarterback. A lot of people wondered whether the Cleveland Browns made a smart choice by drafting him where they did in the first round, especially since quarterbacks who were drafted later, including Derek Carr and Teddy Bridgewater, actually had better on-field performance than Johnny Manziel. And clearly, Johnny Manziel had a lot of issues to the point where, as we mentioned in the article, he voluntarily checked himself into a rehab facility to help address those issues. In the short term, he did add a lot of value to the Browns because he's able to drive interest and excitement and engagement, particularly in those core revenue streams. Like, as we mentioned, one of the key things is that television ratings were up for the Cleveland Browns, and television revenue is where teams get a majority of their revenue. And a lot of that, the team was better, so that helps increase ratings. But clearly, a lot of that was because of Johnny Manziel and people interested in Johnny Manziel as well. And where he played over, as we mentioned in the article, he played only in 5 games, but that still was driving a lot of interest and excitement to the team. So the main thing here is that, so from a short-term investment perspective, the Cleveland Browns got a lot of value from that draft pick. From a long-term perspective, it's not clear that Johnny Manziel is going to keep those fans or keep that engagement. And once again, a good example here is Robert Griffin. Now, Robert Griffin clearly did not have the off-the-field issues that Johnny Manziel had, but his performance has started to lag. And as his performance has started to lag, while he's still getting engagement and still getting a significant off-the-field contribution for the Redskins, it's not as much as what he was in 2012 and 2013. So, again, you have to look at the short-term and long-term value of players. And Johnny Manziel, while he has delivered in the short term, and I think will continue even in next year delivering in the short term, long-term his value may decline to the point where he's more of a replacement-level player than a star player.
Couple minutes left in the program. I'm going to ask, and I didn't see his name mentioned in the article, but someone who is probably close to you, and as you're lecturing at Northwestern, you're probably getting the question, how does Jay Cutler fit in this whole equation? And I put that under the category of what were they thinking? He is making millions and millions of dollars. How does he compare in the revenue above replacement?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, Jay Cutler and Brandon Marshall are 2 players that are really interesting from a Bears fan's perspective. Jay Cutler, while he actually, his on-the-field performance, I think from an advanced analytics perspective, was a little bit better than what fans would think, he actually, in terms of our metrics for the 2014 season, delivered negative $9 million in value, so essentially costing the Bears $9 million in value. Brandon Marshall cost the Bears $6.5 million in value. So, his on-the-field performance combined with his off-the-field, the lack of engagement, the antipathy that fans and media have towards Jay Cutler means that, while he is delivering some value to the Bears, in terms of, it's not matching up to his contract. So his cash payout in the 2014 season was actually $17.5 million, which is a lot, but it's probably a little bit less than people expect given his salary and contract and bonus numbers that they've heard in the media. But the Bears, even though they're still playing with Jay Cutler, and he can still add value, but clearly he's not going to be the star player, and he's not going to deliver the value longer term, and we shouldn't expect him to, that a quarterback maybe like Russell Wilson can. From Brandon Marshall, he actually had, from a 2013 perspective, actually was really valuable to the Bears, and we found and estimated that he delivered $16 million in value to the Bears. So it actually made sense for the Bears to keep him in the 2014 season, but it also looks like it makes sense that to trade him for the 2015 season, where he's coming off a down year, he's had a long injury history, and it's not clear that his off-the-field contributions are going to continue in the same way that they have over the past 2 years. So in terms of those 2 players, they're really interesting examples of our model in action.
Well, it's a fascinating article in Forbes magazine. We're talking about it here. Are they talking about it in our general managers talking about it? Our cap specialists for teams talking about it? How prominent is revenue above replacement as they're sitting there and working all these numbers?
Well, I think from a general manager and ownership perspective, this is a new idea. We just created the metric in the fall of 2013, the fall of 2014 to talk about the 2013 season. I think you'll see this the business side of sports in particular is probably where, or a lot of the business side in sports in particular, is where baseball was before Moneyball came around. In particular, the book, which really pushed baseball and performance analytics into the forefront of general managers' minds. So we're not necessarily saying we're the next Moneyball, or this is going to have a movie starring Brad Pitt about above replacement anytime soon. But I think this idea of seeing players holistically and seeing both their on-field and off-field contributions is something that teams are starting to look at, but we see that in the next few years that this is something that teams and general managers and owners are really going to look at in more detail.
It's a fascinating concept, revenue above replacement. It's in the latest Forbes magazine talking about the NFL draft. Back with us on the program, Adam Grossman. Adam's website, very simple, Block6, spell it out, S-I-X, analytics.com. And we'll have him back in the program. We want to talk about the NBA's got this exciting new contract. We hear a little bit about it as fans because we're hearing a lot of players saying, we want to wait another year and then have our free agency year because there's going to be a lot of money being thrown around out there. We'll have Adam back to talk about that. The business side of sports. The book is called The Sports Strategist. Adam, always a pleasure to have you with us on the program. Thank you so much. Look forward to having you back.
It was great talking to you. It was a very great, interesting discussion, and looking forward to being back soon.
And you will be. Adam Grossman, our guest on This Week in America. Once again, Adam's website, block6analytics.com. Go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and you can link on directly to Adam's website. This Week in America, our website, thisweekinamerica.us.